In this video, we are going to be talking about the most disturbing lore in The Simpsons. And I don't mean the treehouse of horror stuff where Homer turns into a blob or Bart gets chased by Sideshow Bob with a machete. I'm talking about the real lore. The things buried underneath 37 seasons of yellow skin and donut jokes that most people never think twice about. We're talking about a man who was driven insane and killed by a universe that refused to punish Homer Simpson. We're talking about a crayon shoved into a 6-year-old's brain that retroactively turned every laugh you ever had at Homer into something deeply uncomfortable. We're talking about characters who died because of real-world pay disputes, actors who were murdered, and an episode so controversial it became the only one in Simpsons history to be permanently banned from every platform on Earth. The Simpsons has been on the air since December 17, 1989. Over 790 episodes across 37 seasons, and somewhere in that mountain of content is a show that isn't a comedy at all. It's a horror story wearing a yellow mask. So let's peel it off. And to do that, we have to start with the single darkest episode the show ever produced. The one where a good man walked into Springfield, met Homer Simpson, and never walked out alive. His name was Frank Grimes, and depending on how you look at it, he was either the most tragic character The Simpsons ever created or the most honest. Because Frank Grimes was the only person in 37 seasons of this show who looked at Homer Simpson and had the exact same reaction you or I would have if we met him in real life. And the show killed him for it. The episode is called Homer's Enemy, Season 8, Episode 23. It aired on May 4th, 1997, and it was written by John Swartzwelder, who a lot of people consider to be the greatest Simpsons writer of all time. The episode currently holds a 9.3 on IMDb, making it the highest-rated episode in the entire series, higher than Cape Fear, higher than Marge versus the Monorail, higher than the Who Shot Mr. Burns cliffhanger. And the reason it holds that spot is because it did something no other Simpsons episode had ever done before. It asked a very simple question. What would happen if a real person showed up in this cartoon and actually had to deal with Homer Simpson? The answer was Frank Grimes. Grimes was introduced through a news segment that Mr. Burns happened to catch on television. The story was about a man who had been abandoned by his parents at the age of 4, never went to school, and spent his entire childhood working as a delivery boy, bringing gifts to rich families he would never be part of. He taught himself everything. He clawed his way through life, earned a degree in nuclear physics through sheer willpower, and survived a silo explosion that nearly killed him. The news called him a real American hero. Burns was so moved by the story that he ordered Smithers to hire Grimes immediately as executive vice president of the Springfield nuclear power plant. But here's where Springfield does what Springfield always does. By the next morning, Burns had completely forgotten about Frank Grimes. He had seen another news story, this time about a heroic dog that saved a child, and gave the executive VP position to the dog instead. Grimes was reassigned to a low-level position in Sector 7G, working alongside Homer Simpson. And that is where everything fell apart. Grimes was a man who had earned every single thing in his life. Homer was a man who had earned nothing. Homer was the safety inspector at a nuclear power plant despite having no qualifications whatsoever. He slept on the job. He ate other people's lunches without realizing it. He had nearly caused meltdowns so many times that Lenny, his own coworker, estimated Homer had cheated death 316 times. And yet Homer owned a house, had a beautiful wife, 2 cars, 3 kids, had been to space, won a Grammy, toured with the Smashing Pumpkins, and was personal friends with a former president of the United States. Frank Grimes looked at all of this and did the only rational thing a person could do. He lost his mind. The conflict escalates across the entire episode. Homer accidentally steals Grimes' personalized stationery. Homer eats his special dietetic lunch without a second thought. And in one scene that changes everything, Homer picks up a beaker of sulfuric acid and almost drinks it. Grimes lunges across the room and knocks it out of his hand, saving Homer's life. The acid hits the wall and melts through it like butter. And at that exact moment, Mr. Burns walks by. But Burns doesn't thank Grimes for saving a life. He doesn't acknowledge what just happened. Instead, because the wall is damaged, Burns docks Grimes' pay. Homer, the guy who almost killed himself with acid, walks away without a scratch. That is the moment Grimes declares Homer his enemy. Not because Homer is malicious. Homer actually tries to befriend Grimes the entire episode. He invites him to dinner, He puts on his best suit. He has Marge prepare lobster, which is not something the Simpsons normally eat. Homer genuinely wants this guy to like him. But when Grimes arrives at the Simpson home and sees the house, the cars, the lobster, the happy family, all of Homer's framed accomplishments on the wall, he doesn't see a friendly dinner. He sees proof that the universe is broken. Grimes tells Homer that in any other country in the world, a man like him would have starved to death long ago. He says that people like Homer are what's wrong with America, that they do as little as possible while leeching off hardworking people. And the worst part is that Grimes isn't wrong. Everything he says is factually accurate within the logic of the show. Homer is incompetent. Homer has been handed everything. The only difference between Grimes and every other character in Springfield is that Grimes refuses to accept it. So Grimes comes up with a plan. He finds a flyer for a design contest where participants have to build a model nuclear power plant. What he doesn't tell Homer is that the contest is for children, elementary school kids. Grimes figures that if Homer enters a contest meant for kids and loses, everyone will finally see him for the fraud he is. It's a solid plan, logical, fair, and it backfires in the worst possible way. Homer enters the contest with a crudely made model that's basically a bad copy of the existing plant with fins glued onto, and I quote, lower wind resistance and a racing stripe. It is objectively terrible. A child named Martin Prince built a model that was actually generating real electricity for the auditorium. Ralph Wiggum's entry was literally a Malibu Stacy dream house, and Homer wins. First place. Standing ovation from the crowd. Mr. Burns personally congratulates him. Grimes stands in the audience watching this happen, and something inside him breaks. He starts running through the plant, screaming that he's Homer Simpson. He imitates Homer's worst habits. He eats like a slob. He declares he doesn't need safety gloves because he's Homer Simpson. And then he grabs a bundle of high-voltage cables with his bare hands and electrocutes himself to death. Right there on the plant floor, in front of everyone. And the show doesn't give him a heroic death or a meaningful send-off. It gives him a funeral where Homer falls asleep in the pew, starts talking in his sleep, telling Marge to change the channel, and the entire church erupts in laughter as Grimes' coffin is lowered into the ground. Reverend Lovejoy even refers to him by the nickname Homer gave him, Grimy, which Grimes hated. The last act of disrespect in a life that was nothing but disrespect. Writer John Swartzwelder was asked about the dark ending in a rare interview. His response was simple. He said Grimy was asking for it the whole episode. He didn't approve of our Homer, he was asking for it, and he got it. Producer Bill Oakley confirmed that Grimes was deliberately designed as a surrogate for the audience. A real person dropped into the cartoon universe of The Simpsons, and the point of the episode was to show what would happen. The answer is that the real person dies and the cartoon keeps going. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, ranked Homer's Enemy as his 6th favorite episode of all time. Multiple critics have called it the darkest episode the show ever produced, and Frank Grimes' tombstone has appeared in the background of episodes for decades since. Sometimes with different inscriptions, sometimes with Ralph Wiggum playing on top of it like a sandbox. The show never forgot him, it just never cared. If Frank Grimes' story was about one man being destroyed by a universe that wouldn't punish Homer, then what comes next is about Homer being destroyed by a truth he was never supposed to find. Because 12 seasons after Grimes died trying to prove Homer was a fraud, the show accidentally revealed something that made the entire series uncomfortable. And it all came down to a crayon. The episode is called HOMR, with the R written backwards. Season 12, Episode 9. It aired on January 7th, 2001, and it was written by Al Jean, one of the most important writers in the show's history. It won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program that year. And the reason it won is because it told a story so emotionally devastating that it made people rethink everything they had laughed at for over a decade. It starts with Homer losing the family's entire life savings on a bad stock investment. A motion capture animation company called Animotion goes bankrupt 2 days after Homer buys in, and the family is broke. To make money, Homer takes a job as a human guinea pig at a medical testing center. During the experiments, the doctors notice something strange on his brain scan. They zoom in and find a crayon, a literal crayon lodged in Homer's frontal lobe. Homer explains that when he was 6 years old, he shoved a 16-pack of crayons up his nose. When he sneezed, 15 came out. He assumed he got them all. He didn't. One crayon stayed lodged in his brain for over 30 years, slowly suppressing his cognitive function his entire life. The doctors offer to remove it. Homer agrees, and the surgery works. Almost immediately, Homer becomes intelligent, not genius level. His IQ rises to about 105, which is technically just average. But for Homer, it's a transformation. He starts reading books. He solves Rubik's Cubes while listening to NPR. He delivers an inspiring speech to the kids at Springfield Elementary about not sticking things up their noses. And most importantly, he bonds with Lisa. This is the emotional core of the episode. Lisa Simpson has spent her entire life as the smartest person in a family that doesn't understand her. She reads books nobody else reads. She cares about issues nobody else cares about. She's lonely in the most fundamental way a person can be lonely, surrounded by people who love her but can't reach her. And now, for the first time, her father gets it. They go to the library together. They talk about things that matter. Homer writes a safety report for the nuclear plant that is so thorough and accurate that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission actually shuts the plant down. But that is where things go wrong. Homer's intelligence makes him effective, and effectiveness has consequences. The plant closure puts the entire town out of work. His friends at Moe's Tavern, the people he's known for years, turn on him. They burn an effigy of Homer outside the bar. He's banned from the one place he always felt welcome. Homer goes to Lisa and asks her a question that cuts right to the center of the show. He asks her why he's unhappy even though he's smart. Lisa pulls out a graph because Lisa always has a graph, and shows him that as intelligence goes up, happiness tends to go down. She tells him that smart people see the world more clearly, and clarity is not the same thing as joy. Homer makes a decision. He goes to Moe, who it turns out is an unlicensed surgeon on the side, and asks him to hammer a crayon back into his brain. Moe straps Homer to his pool table, takes a crayon and a mallet, and performs what the show calls the old Crayola oblongata. Homer walks out dumb again, happy again, himself again. Lisa finds out what happened, and she is devastated. But then she finds a letter. Homer wrote it before the surgery while he was still smart enough to understand what he was about to lose. The letter tells Lisa that his brief time being intelligent showed him exactly how special she is, that he now understands what it's like to see the world clearly and feel completely alone in a room full of people who don't, that he admires her strength more than she will ever know, and that even though he won't remember writing this letter, the love behind it is real. It is one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the history of the show, and it is also one of the most disturbing, because here is what that episode really revealed. For 12 seasons before HOMR aired, audiences had been laughing at Homer Simpson, laughing at his stupidity, laughing at his clumsiness, laughing at the way he stumbles through life leaving destruction in his wake. And now the show was telling you that all of that stupidity, every single moment of it, was caused by a brain injury he suffered as a child. You weren't laughing at a lovable idiot, you were laughing at a disabled man, and the show knew it. That's why it won the Emmy. Homer chose to be stupid because being smart meant being alone. Frank Grimes died because the universe punished him for noticing Homer was stupid, and now we know Homer's stupidity wasn't even his fault. It was a crayon, a childhood accident that nobody caught for 30 years because, as Dr. Hibbert explained with a straight face, his thumb always happened to cover the crayon every time he held up Homer's X-ray. But if Homer's tragedy was accidental, the next one was very much on purpose. Because the darkest lore in The Simpsons isn't always hiding inside the episodes. Sometimes it's hiding behind the scenes, in the decisions the show made about which characters would live and which ones would die. And the first character killed for reasons that had nothing to do with the story was a woman named Maud Flanders. Maud was Ned Flanders' wife. She had been on the show since the very beginning. A kind, quiet, church-going woman who mostly existed in the background, supporting Ned, raising Rod and Todd, and occasionally getting dragged into whatever chaos the Simpsons brought to the neighborhood. She wasn't a major character, she wasn't the star of episodes, but she was a fixture, part of the furniture of Springfield. And in season 11, the show killed her in one of the most absurd and disrespectful ways imaginable. The episode is called Alone Again, Natura Diddly. It aired during season 11, and in it, the Simpson family attends a car race where t-shirt cannons are firing into the crowd. Homer, being Homer, draws attention to himself and ends up dodging a volley of shirts. The shirts fly past him and hit Maud Flanders directly in the chest with enough force to knock her backwards off the top of the grandstand. She falls to her death at a sporting event, killed by promotional merchandise. Now here is the part that makes this truly dark. Maud Flanders wasn't killed because the writers had a compelling story to tell about loss or grief. She was killed because of a pay dispute. Voice actress Maggie Roswell lived in Denver, Colorado, and had to fly to Los Angeles every time the show needed her to record lines. She asked for a pay increase to cover travel costs. The negotiations broke down, and instead of working something out, the show wrote her character's death into the script. That one decision changed Ned Flanders forever. Before Maud's death, Ned was the cheerful Christian neighbor, the guy who said "okily dokily" and always had a smile. After Maud died, Ned became something else entirely, a grieving widower trying to hold it together. The show explored his loneliness, his fumbling attempts at dating, and his slow spiral into a more rigid and sometimes bitter version of himself. All of that character development, every shift in Ned's personality over the next 26 seasons, traces back to a pay dispute with an actress in Denver. And then there are the fan theories. In season 6, the episode Lisa's Wedding showed a flash forward to the future where Lisa is about to get married. In that future, an elderly Ned and Maud Flanders are shown together in the audience, alive, happy. But Maud was later killed off in season 11. So how does she appear alive in Lisa's future? One theory suggests that Lisa, seeing the future, actually changed it. That if the Simpsons had never gone to the Renaissance Fair in that episode, Maud would have survived. Another theory, and this one is genuinely creepy, points to a later episode called I'm Going to Praiseland, where a woman named Rachel Jordan stays at Ned's house. She wakes up to find that Ned has cut her hair while she slept to make her look like Maud. Fans theorize that the elderly Maud in Lisa's Wedding wasn't actually Maud at all. It was someone Ned had groomed over the years to replace her. The show never confirmed or denied any of this. Maggie Roswell did eventually return to the show in season 14, voicing other characters. But Maud stayed dead, a character erased not by storytelling but by contract negotiations. And she was just the beginning, because The Simpsons has a long, strange history of killing characters, and the reasons behind those deaths range from heartbreaking to outright cynical. So let's go through every major one. If the way Maud Flanders died made you uncomfortable, stick around. Because the deaths that came after her are worse. Not because of how the characters died in the show, but because of what was happening in the real world when they did. The first character death that actually mattered emotionally was Bleeding Gums Murphy. If you don't remember him, he was the jazz musician who played saxophone on a bridge over the Springfield Freeway. He first appeared in the 6th episode of season 1, an episode called Moaning Lisa, and his role in that episode was simple but important. Lisa Simpson was depressed. She couldn't explain why. She couldn't connect with her family. She couldn't make anyone understand what she was feeling. And then she heard music. Sad, beautiful, honest music coming from a man sitting alone on a bridge in the middle of the night, playing saxophone to nobody. That man was Bleeding Gums Murphy, and he became the only adult in Springfield who truly understood Lisa. Not her intelligence, not her grades, not her activism, her loneliness. He connected with her on the level that nobody else could, and for a few brief episodes, Lisa had someone who got it. He died in season 6, episode 22, an episode called Round Springfield. The cause was illness and cardiac arrest. He died in a hospital bed, and Lisa was the only one there who really cared. The show gave him a tribute, let Lisa grieve, and then moved on. Murphy appeared in a few later episodes as a ghost or a hologram, but the character never came back. Not really. And here's the thing that makes Bleeding Gums Murphy's death genuinely disturbing within the lore of the show. Go back and watch the HOMR episode, the one where Homer gets the crayon removed and briefly becomes smart enough to connect with Lisa. The entire emotional weight of that episode rests on the fact that Lisa is desperate for someone in her family to understand her. She finally gets that with smart Homer, and then she loses it when he puts the crayon back. Now think about the fact that years before that, she already had someone who understood her, and the show killed him off. Bleeding Gums. Murphy was Lisa's escape from the loneliness that defines her character. Losing him meant she went right back to being the smartest, most isolated person in Springfield. And the show didn't replace him. It never gave Lisa another mentor who operated on that level. She just had to deal with it. A child surrounded by people who love her, completely alone. But at least Bleeding Gums Murphy's death served the story. The next major death in the show's history didn't serve anything except reality, and it broke the fourth wall in a way the show never intended. Edna Krabappel was Bart's fourth-grade teacher. She was sarcastic, tired, underpaid, and one of the most reliably funny characters in the series. She had a long-running on-and-off relationship with Principal Skinner that fans loved, and in the later seasons, the show paired her with Ned Flanders in what became one of the most surprisingly genuine romances the series ever produced. It wasn't played purely for laughs, it felt real. Two lonely people finding each other in a town full of chaos. And then Marcia Wallace died. The actress who voiced Edna Krabappel passed away on October 25, 2013. And unlike other situations where the show recast characters with new actors, the producers made the decision to retire Edna permanently. Her death was confirmed off-screen in the season 25 episode The Man Who Grew Too Much. The chalkboard gag in the episode after her passing simply read, "We'll really miss you, Mrs. K." There's something uniquely painful about Edna's death that separates it from every other character exit in the show. When Maud Flanders was killed, it was a business decision. When Bleeding Gums Murphy died, it was a story choice. But Edna's death was something the show couldn't write its way around. The writers didn't choose to lose her, they lost her. And the show's response, which was to let the character go rather than replace the actress, was both a tribute and an admission that some things can't be fixed with clever writing. The relationship between Edna and Ned, which the show had spent years building, just stopped. No resolution, no final scene, just absence. And for a show that has been accused of never letting anything have real consequences, Edna's death was the one moment where the consequences were permanent and total, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. But even Edna's death, as heartbreaking as it was, doesn't compare to what happened to Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. Because their story isn't just dark, it's a tragedy that extends far beyond the boundaries of Springfield. Troy McClure was the washed-up B-movie actor who introduced himself to everyone with the same line. "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as," and then he'd list two increasingly absurd fake movie titles. He showed up in dozens of episodes. He hosted infomercials, starred in terrible educational films, and married Selma Bouvier in a sham marriage to revive his career. He was one of the most quotable characters in the entire series. Lionel Hutz was Springfield's incompetent lawyer, the guy who handed out his business card at funerals and once argued a case so badly the judge awarded damages to the other side out of sheer frustration. He was a con artist, a hack, and somehow lovable in spite of all of it. Both characters were voiced by Phil Hartman, and on May 28, 1998, Phil Hartman was murdered by his wife in their home. He was one of the most talented comedic actors of his generation, a veteran of Saturday Night Live, and a core part of what made The Simpsons' golden era golden. His death was sudden, violent, and senseless. The show's response was unprecedented. They did not recast Troy McClure. They did not recast Lionel Hutz. They retired both characters permanently. No farewell episodes, no tributes within the show's universe. The characters simply stopped appearing. It was the only time in the show's history that characters were removed entirely because the person behind them was gone. Now compare that to what happened later. In 2020 and 2021, the show recast several characters for entirely different reasons. Dr. Hibbert was moved from Harry Shearer to Kevin Michael Richardson starting in season 32. Carl Carlson was moved from Hank Azaria to Alex Desire in the same season. These were recasting decisions based on the show's evolving policy about white actors voicing non-white characters. The original actors were alive and well. The characters continued with new voices, but for Phil Hartman, the show drew a hard line. Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz could not exist without him. They weren't characters that could be handed to someone else. They were Phil Hartman, and when Phil Hartman was gone, they were gone. It was a rare moment of genuine respect from a show that has spent decades treating most of its characters as interchangeable parts. And the silence where those characters used to be, the absence of Troy McClure's introductions and Lionel Hutz's terrible legal advice, is one of the saddest things about watching the show today. If you've stuck with this so far, you're starting to see the pattern. The Simpsons kills characters, sometimes for story reasons, sometimes for business reasons, sometimes because real life reaches into the cartoon and takes someone away. But what happens next is what really defines Springfield, because the way this town handles death tells you everything you need to know about the kind of universe these characters live in. Take Fat Tony. The original Fat Tony, the mob boss who ran Springfield's criminal underworld for over 2 decades. He died of a heart attack in season 22, episode 9, an episode called Donnie Fatso. It was a legitimate character death. He clutched his chest, collapsed, and that was it. The Don was dead. Springfield's criminal empire was without a leader. And the show's solution was genuinely unhinged. Within the same episode, Fat Tony's cousin showed up. His name was Fit Tony. He was thin, health-conscious, and looked absolutely nothing like the original. But over the course of a few scenes, Fit Tony started eating more. He gained weight, he grew into the suit, and by the end of the episode, he was physically indistinguishable from the Fat Tony who had just died. The show literally replaced a dead man with an identical copy and told the audience to move on. No mourning period, no power struggle, just a cosmic find and replace. And then there was Rabbi Hyman Krustovsky, Krusty the Clown's father, a deeply religious man who disowned his son for becoming a comedian, leading to one of the show's most emotionally grounded storylines when they eventually reconciled. The rabbi died in the season 26 premiere, Clown in the Dumps. The show used his death as a hook to generate buzz heading into the new season, teased it as a major character death in the marketing, and then once the episode aired, pretty much forgot about it. Krusty grieved for an episode, maybe 2, and then the show went back to business as usual. This is how Springfield operates. Someone dies, someone fills the slot, and the machine keeps running. Fat Tony was replaced by a body double. The rabbi was mourned for a commercial break. Bleeding Gums Murphy became a hologram. Maud Flanders became a backstory. Death in The Simpsons isn't permanent in the way it is in the real world. It's a factory reset. And the town's ability to absorb loss and move on without blinking is either a commentary on the resilience of communities or proof that nothing in Springfield actually matters. Probably both. But there is one death in the show's history that doesn't fit the pattern. One episode that was pulled from existence not because a character died in the fiction, but because of what was happening outside of it. And this is the one that genuinely makes your skin crawl. The episode is called Stark Raving Dad, Season 3, Episode 1. It aired on September 19th, 1991. In it, Homer is committed to a mental institution after wearing a pink shirt to work and being diagnosed as insane. While inside, he meets a large white man named Leon Kompowski, who claims to be Michael Jackson. Leon speaks in Michael Jackson's voice, sings like Michael Jackson, and for all intents and purposes is Michael Jackson. The joke is that he's clearly not, but Homer believes him completely. The episode is funny, it's well written, it features one of the most iconic original songs in the show's history, a birthday song that Bart and Leon write for Lisa. And Michael Jackson actually voiced the character. He's credited under the pseudonym John J. Smith, but it was him. Jackson reportedly approached the show himself and asked to be on it. The producers agreed, and the episode became a classic. And then, in 2019, the show pulled it, permanently. The reason was an HBO documentary called Leaving Neverland, which detailed allegations of child sexual abuse against Michael Jackson. After the documentary aired, the show's executive producers, including Al Jean and James L. Brooks, made the decision to remove Stark Raving Dad from every platform on the planet. Every streaming service, every syndication package, every DVD box set going forward. Disney Plus, which became the primary home for The Simpsons, does not include it. The 24-hour Simpsons stream that Disney Plus launched in March 2025, which plays seasons 1 through 35 on a loop, skips it entirely. It is the only episode of The Simpsons in over 790 episodes to be completely and permanently banned. And here's the part that lingers. Michael Jackson didn't just voice a character on the show, he reportedly used his connection with The Simpsons as a way to build relationships. The song Do the Bartman, which was released in November 1990 and reached number 1 in the United Kingdom, Australia, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, and Luxembourg, featured uncredited contributions from Jackson. The album it came from, The Simpsons Sing the Blues, sold over 2 million copies in the United States alone. He was deeply embedded in the cultural machine of the show during its earliest and most influential years. And the producers made the call that his presence, even a 22-minute animated appearance from 1991, could not remain. Think about what that means. A children's television show looked at its own history, found something it could no longer justify, and erased it. Not edited it, not disclaimed it, erased it. Stark Raving Dad doesn't exist anymore in any official capacity. You can't watch it on any platform, you can't buy it. The show pretends it never happened. And yet for decades it aired in reruns, was included in best of lists, and was watched by millions of kids who had no idea what was behind the curtain. That is disturbing lore. Not the cartoon version, the real version. A show that banned its own episode because of what happened off screen. Characters killed for pay disputes, characters killed because their actors were murdered, characters replaced by identical copies because the show needed to keep moving. And underneath all of it, a man with a crayon in his brain that nobody bothered to notice for 30 years. That's The Simpsons. But all of that, everything we've talked about so far, takes place in the main canon of the show. The regular episodes, the ones with consequences and continuity. If you want to see what happens when The Simpsons takes the gloves off completely, when the writers are given a license to go as dark, as violent, and as disturbing as they want with absolutely zero consequences, you have to look at the Treehouse of Horror episodes. And some of what they've done in those episodes goes so far beyond what you'd expect from a family sitcom that it's hard to believe it aired on network television. The Treehouse of Horror is an annual Halloween tradition that started on October 25th, 1990, with the third episode of Season 2. Every year, the show produces a special episode that consists of 3 short segments, each one a standalone horror, sci-fi, or dark fantasy story. These segments are explicitly non-canon. Nothing that happens in them carries over to the regular show. Characters can die, the world can end, and the laws of physics can be completely rewritten because none of it counts. And the writers have used that freedom to create some of the most genuinely unsettling content in the history of animated television. As of season 37, there have been 36 Treehouse of Horror episodes. That is over 100 individual horror segments. And while a lot of them are straightforward parodies of movies like The Shining or Nightmare on Elm Street, some of them go places that are hard to shake even after you turn the TV off. The one that most people agree is the darkest of all time is Treehouse of Horror 5. It aired as episode 6 of season 6. It contains 3 segments, and every single one of them ends badly. Not bittersweet, not ambiguous, badly. The first segment is called The Shining, which is obviously a parody of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The Simpsons are hired as winter caretakers for Mr. Burns' mountain lodge. Burns cuts off the TV and beer supply to make Homer work harder. Homer loses his mind, he grabs an axe, and he chases his family through the lodge trying to murder them. Groundskeeper Willie shows up to save the family and gets an axe buried in his back. The second segment is called Time and Punishment. Homer accidentally creates a time machine out of a toaster. Every time he travels to the past and changes even the smallest thing, the present becomes a nightmare. He squashes a bug in the prehistoric era and comes back to find Ned Flanders is the supreme overlord of Earth. He fixes that and comes back to a world where it rains donuts, but his family doesn't know what a donut is. He tries again and again, breaking reality further each time until he finally gives up. He settles for a version of Springfield that's close enough to normal, even though everyone in his family now has lizard tongues. Homer just accepts it. He looks at his family, sees that they're basically okay despite the reptilian mutations, and decides this is good enough. It is one of the most nihilistic endings in the show's history. Not tragic, just resigned. Homer doesn't fix the timeline. He just picks the least broken version of it and calls it home. Groundskeeper Willie shows up in this segment too and once again gets an axe in the back. The third segment is called Nightmare Cafeteria. Springfield Elementary is overcrowded and underfunded. Principal Skinner discovers that detention students make excellent cafeteria food. He starts cooking them. One by one, students disappear and new menu items appear. Bart and Lisa figure out what's happening and try to escape, but they're cornered. Just as they're about to be slaughtered, Bart wakes up. It was all a dream. The family breathes a sigh of relief. And then, in the final scene of the episode, A mysterious green fog rolls into the Simpson house and turns the entire family inside out. Their organs are on the outside, their skin is on the inside, and they all start dancing and singing in their grotesque inside-out state as the credits roll. And yes, groundskeeper Willie gets an axe in the back in this segment too. 3 segments, 3 axe deaths for the same character. It became a running gag within the episode, and Willie even calls it out in the 3rd one, saying he's done trying to save these people. Treehouse of Horror 5 is widely considered the scariest and darkest of all 36 Treehouse episodes. It's the one fans point to when they talk about the show's willingness to go further than any other animated sitcom on network television. But it's far from the only one, because years later, the show produced an episode that was numerically perfect for horror. Episode 666, or as the show itself put it, 667 if Fox changes the schedule. Treehouse of Horror 30, the 30th annual Halloween special. And the segment that opens this episode takes a character who has been silent for the entire run of the show and turns her into something genuinely terrifying. We're talking about Maggie Simpson, the baby, the 1-year-old who never speaks, who sucks on a pacifier, and who once shot Mr. Burns in the season 6 finale. In this Treehouse episode, Maggie doesn't just shoot someone, she becomes the Antichrist. The segment plays it like a horror movie. Dr. Hibbert offers to adopt Maggie, and Maggie responds by using telekinetic powers to choke him with his own stethoscope and set him on fire. She spins the heads of her stuffed animals around like something out of The Exorcist. She makes them vomit up their own stuffing. She causes Kearney and Jimbo, 2 of Springfield's most notorious bullies, to hang themselves. A baby is making teenagers hang themselves on a family sitcom that aired on Fox. Ned Flanders discovers what's happening and decides that Maggie must be destroyed. He tracks her to an abandoned church and tries to kill her. Homer and Marge rush to stop him. And Ned, trying to convince them that their daughter is the literal spawn of Satan, pulls back Maggie's hair to reveal the mark of the beast. Except the first mark he finds isn't the number of the beast, it's the Mickey Mouse logo, which is a joke but also a deeply strange bit of meta-commentary given that The Simpsons is now owned by Disney. The real mark is underneath, the number 666 tattooed on a baby's scalp. Before Ned can do anything, Maggie rises into the air. She breaks through the roof of the church. Homer, looking up at his floating demon daughter, delivers the line that makes the whole segment work. He says she's still better than another boy. And then giant spears come through the walls and impale all 3 parents through the chest. The title card reads Treehouse of Horror 30. And then Maggie's hair is pulled back further to reveal the words, episode 666 or 667 if Fox changes the schedule. It is violent, blasphemous, and absolutely hilarious. And it's the kind of thing that could only exist inside the Treehouse of Horror framework. Because within the main show, Maggie is a silent, innocent baby who occasionally does something surprising. Inside the treehouse, she's a demon child with kill-confirmed powers that would make any horror villain jealous. The gap between those 2 versions of the character is part of what makes the Treehouse episodes so effective. They take characters you know and love and show you what they would look like without the safety rails. And no segment demonstrates this better than what they did to Homer in Treehouse of Horror 33. Not the Maggie segment, a different one. One that takes Homer's most annoying quality and turns it into an extinction-level event. In this segment, Homer eats a donut near the turbine room at the Springfield nuclear power plant, which is explicitly not allowed. He drops the donut and it rolls across the floor, accumulating radioactive material and dirt as it goes, passing through various hazardous areas including Mr. Burns' animal experimentation lab. Homer catches the donut and eats it anyway because he's Homer. The next day, while standing near Ned Flanders, Homer lets out a burp. But it's not a normal burp. It's a green, radioactive cloud carrying Homer's DNA. Ned breathes it in. Over the course of the next few scenes, Ned transforms. His body expands, his hair falls out, his skin turns yellow, his voice drops. He develops an irresistible urge to watch football on television. Ned Flanders, the most devoutly Christian man in Springfield, has been biologically rewritten into Homer Simpson, and it doesn't stop there. At church that Sunday, the newly Homerized Ned lets out an even bigger burp. The cloud spreads through the entire congregation. Everyone transforms. The virus jumps from person to person, town to town, country to country. Kent Brockman transforms into Homer live on the evening news while trying to report on the outbreak. Professor Frink, Springfield's resident scientist, manages to evacuate the children and shows Homer what has happened. The entire world is turning into copies of him. Every human on Earth is becoming Homer Simpson. And there's a detail that makes it even more twisted. The virus doesn't just turn men into Homer, it creates what Frink calls a Marge him, a Homer clone with Marge's hair. The virus is rewriting gender, personality, memory, everything. There is no one left except Homer, and Homer likes it. He genuinely celebrates. He looks around at a world populated entirely by clones of himself, and he's happy. He sees it as an improvement. The episode ends with Homer and every infected clone on the planet singing Just Like Paradise by David Lee Roth while burping radioactive clouds. The world has ended, individuality has been erased, and the guy who caused it is having the time of his life. The subtext here isn't subtle. Homer's narcissism, his complete inability to consider anyone else's experience, taken to its logical extreme, literally destroys human civilization. Everyone becomes him because that's what Homer would want if he could have anything. Not wealth, not power, just a world where everyone is exactly like him so he never has to feel different or challenged or uncomfortable again. It's a comedy sketch built on an existentially horrifying premise. And because it's a Treehouse episode, there are no consequences. No one learns anything. The credits roll, and next week Homer's back to normal, eating donuts in front of the TV as if he didn't just end the species. But the most disturbing segment in Treehouse of Horror 33 isn't the Homer virus, it's the one about Lisa. In the same episode, there's a segment where Sideshow Bob finally succeeds. He kills Bart Simpson. After decades of trying, decades of failing, decades of stepping on rakes, Bob gets his man. Bart is dead. And in the aftermath of her brother's murder, Lisa Simpson develops a split personality, an evil alter ego that none of the other characters can see coming. This version of Lisa begins systematically murdering people across Springfield. Her first victim is Rod Flanders, then Montaigne Prince, then Dermot Spuckler, then Sherry McElberry. And there's a pattern. Every single victim is a firstborn child. Each one is left with a message saying they were the first. Lisa's evil personality is targeting firstborns across Springfield in a calculated, methodical killing spree. She later kills Nelson Muntz inside an abandoned slaughterhouse as well. Lisa goes to prison to ask Sideshow Bob, her brother's killer, for help identifying the murderer. Bob just mocks her. It isn't until Sherry's funeral, when Terry mentions that although they were twins, Sherry was born first, that Lisa pieces together the firstborn pattern. She tracks the killer to an abandoned slaughterhouse owned by someone named Anna Graham. Inside, she stumbles into the killer's lair. It's decorated to look exactly like her old bedroom, and when she checks the security camera footage, she is horrified to see herself on the screen. Killing Nelson, she is the murderer. She's been doing it the entire time and didn't know. Lisa is arrested and placed in the same cell as Sideshow Bob, which was the plan all along. Her evil personality engineered the entire thing. The murders, the clues, the arrest, all of it was a scheme to get herself locked in a cell with the man who killed her brother. And in the final scene, killer Lisa plays HMS Pinafore on a gramophone and stabs Sideshow Bob to death with a knife. She avenged Bart, but the cost was her sanity, her innocence, and the lives of everyone she killed along the way. This is Lisa Simpson, the 8-year-old vegetarian Buddhist jazz prodigy who cares about the environment and always does the right thing. And in the space of one Treehouse segment, the show turned her into a serial killer with a god complex, because that's what the Treehouse episodes are for. They're the show's pressure valve, the place where the writers can explore the absolute worst version of every character without any lasting damage. And that brings us to the bigger picture of what the Treehouse of Horror represents within the lore of The Simpsons. Because these episodes aren't just annual Halloween specials. They're a parallel universe where the show reveals what it's actually capable of when it stops caring about being a family sitcom. The first Treehouse of Horror aired on October 25, 1990. It featured 3 segments. The first was a parody of the Amityville Horror, where the Simpsons move into a haunted house. The house possesses the family and forces them to try to kill each other. Marge yells at the house to show some manners, and the house, genuinely hurt by her words, decides it would rather destroy itself than live with the Simpsons. It implodes. Lisa feels guilty about it. It's funny, slightly creepy, and relatively tame compared to what came later. The second segment had the family abducted by Kang and Kodos, the two recurring aliens who would become Treehouse of Horror staples. They were being fattened up for a meal, which Lisa figured out. The third segment was a reading of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, with Homer as the narrator and Bart as the Raven. It was atmospheric, literary, and the kind of thing that no other cartoon on television was doing in 1990. But over 36 years, the Treehouse evolved. The early episodes were genuine horror parodies. By the 2000s, they were parodying Stranger Things, The Ring mixed with TikTok, Split, COVID-19 pandemic outbreaks, and even Invasion of the Body Snatchers reimagined as an Apple product launch. The segments got darker, more violent, more willing to push boundaries. A segment where Ned Flanders murders Homer in a parody of the Dead Zone. A segment where the dolphins revolt and take over the planet. A segment where Bart is tortured in hell and becomes an honor student because hell values cruelty and creativity. The Treehouse of Horror has become the longest-running annual Halloween special in American television history. And the fact that it exists at all, that a family sitcom has an annual tradition of airing content involving child cannibalism, demonic possession, mass extinction events, and serial-killing 8-year-olds, says something profound about what The Simpsons actually is underneath the surface. It's not just a comedy, it's a show that has been exploring the darkest corners of its own universe for over 3 decades, and the Treehouse episodes are where it does so openly instead of hiding it behind donut jokes and couch gags. If the Treehouse of Horror is where The Simpsons reveals its darkest possibilities, then the predictions are where the show accidentally reveals something about the real world. Because The Simpsons has been on the air so long and has generated so much content that some of its jokes have aged into prophecies. And depending on who you ask, that's either the most fascinating coincidence in television history or the most unsettling. Let's start with the one everybody knows, the Trump prediction, because this is the one that broke the internet and the one that deserves the most context. In the year 2000, The Simpsons aired an episode called Bart to the Future. It was a flash-forward episode where Bart looks into his future and sees what his life becomes. The main story is about Bart being a washed-up musician. But the B-plot is where things get interesting. In Bart's future, Lisa Simpson has become the President of the United States, and in her very first scene in the Oval Office, she makes a reference to inheriting a budget crisis from the previous administration. She says, and this is the line that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories, that she inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. That episode aired on March 19, 2000. Donald Trump did not announce his first real presidential campaign until 2015. He did not win the presidency until 2016. 16 years separated the joke from the reality. And when people rediscovered this clip after Trump won, the internet lost its collective mind. How did they know? Were the writers psychic? Was Matt Groening hiding something? Were the producers of a cartoon show somehow tapped into the future of American politics? The answer is far less exciting than the conspiracy, but it's actually more interesting. Trump had been publicly talking about running for president since the late 1990s. He explored a Reform Party candidacy in 1999 and early 2000. It was in the news. The Simpsons writers, who were some of the most politically engaged comedy writers in television, saw a loud, controversial billionaire flirting with the presidency and wrote a joke about it. They picked Trump for the same reason any satirist would. He was the most absurd choice imaginable at the time, which made him the funniest. The joke wasn't that Trump would actually become president. The joke was that America would be desperate enough to let it happen. And then America did. Al Jean, one of the show's most senior writers and producers, has been asked about this prediction more times than he can count. His standard response is that the show makes a lot of educated guesses, and when you've been on the air for over 30 years making jokes about every aspect of American life, some of those guesses are going to land. Producer Bill Oakley has been even more direct. He said there are very few cases where The Simpsons actually predicted something, and that it's mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. But that hasn't stopped the legend from growing, because the Trump prediction isn't the only one. In 1998, the show aired an episode called When You Dish Upon a Star. In one scene, there's a brief shot of a sign that reads, 20th Century Fox, a division of Walt Disney Company. At the time, this was a joke about corporate consolidation in the entertainment industry. Fox was a massive independent media company. Disney was already the biggest name in family entertainment. The idea of Disney swallowing Fox was absurd enough to be funny. And then 21 years later, on March 20th, 2019, Disney completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox for $71 billion. The Simpsons now airs on a network owned by the company it joked about in 1998. Again, the explanation is less supernatural than it appears. Media consolidation was already a clear trend in the late 90s. Warner Brothers merged with Time Incorporated. Viacom was buying everything in sight. The writers saw the trajectory and pushed it to its logical extreme. But when your logical extreme becomes reality 2 decades later, it's hard not to feel a little uneasy about it. The show also appeared to predict smartwatch technology years before it existed. Multiple episodes featured characters wearing wrist-mounted communication devices that looked remarkably similar to what Apple would eventually release as the Apple Watch. There's an episode from 2016 called Friends and Family where Professor Frink develops virtual reality headsets that completely consume the residents of Springfield. Everyone becomes addicted to their VR world, ignoring real life entirely. When Apple launched the Vision Pro headset in February 2024, people immediately started drawing comparisons to that episode. The Simpsons writers weren't predicting VR headsets. VR had been a concept in science fiction for decades. But they nailed the social consequences, the isolation, the addiction, the way people would choose a simulated reality over the messy, imperfect real one. There's a season 23 episode called Them, Robot, where Mr. Burns replaces all the workers at the nuclear plant with robots. Homer's kept as the sole human employee for maintenance purposes and as a potential scapegoat. The town suffers 99% unemployment, and the robots eventually turn on the human population. This episode aired in 2012. In 2025, the conversation about AI replacing human workers is one of the most dominant topics in global economics. Again, the show didn't predict AI. It extrapolated a trend that was already visible and turned it into a joke. But the specifics of how that joke plays out, the mass unemployment, the dehumanization of the workforce, the corporate indifference to the consequences, feel eerily accurate. And then there are the predictions that people don't talk about, because for every prediction that came true, there are hundreds that didn't, and nobody makes viral videos about the misses. The Simpsons predicted a zombie apocalypse caused by contaminated meat. It didn't happen. They predicted a black hole swallowing Springfield, which was their satirical take on doomsday anxiety. No black holes have consumed any towns in the American Midwest as of this recording. They predicted World War III in a short that aired on the Tracy Ullman Show back in 1987, with Homer waking up the family to rush to a fallout shelter because bombs were dropping. We are not currently in a nuclear war. They hinted at Mars colonization happening within a human lifetime. Elon Musk hasn't gotten us there yet, though he keeps saying he will. The point is that The Simpsons has produced so many episodes covering so many topics that sheer volume guarantees some hits. This isn't prediction, it's probability. Stephanie Gillis, one of the show's writers, explained it simply. She said there are so many things happening in the world, and she spends a lot of time thinking about the show even outside of work. The writers are immersed in culture, politics, technology, and current events. They are professional observers of the world, and their job is to push what they observe to its most absurd conclusion. Sometimes reality catches up. Snopes, the fact-checking website, has debunked numerous Simpsons predictions over the years. Their standard explanation is that the show's enormous output means there are a lot of jokes and a lot of opportunities for coincidences to appear. Most of the so-called predictions have fairly simple and mundane explanations when you look at them closely. People remember the hits and forget the misses because that's how the human brain works. We are pattern-seeking machines, and we will find patterns even where none exist. But here's the thing. Even knowing all of that, even understanding the statistics and the psychology and the perfectly reasonable explanations, there is one Simpsons prediction that genuinely defies easy explanation. And it's not about Trump or Disney or smartwatches. In 1996, The Simpsons aired an episode called Homer Palooza. It's the one where Homer tries to prove he's still cool by attending a music festival and ends up becoming a sideshow act where cannonballs are fired at his stomach. The episode features several real bands, including Cypress Hill, a hip-hop group from Los Angeles. There's a joke in the episode where it's mentioned that Cypress Hill, while under the influence of marijuana, accidentally booked the London Symphony Orchestra for a performance. The joke is that a stoned hip-hop group would never actually perform with a classical orchestra. It's absurd, that's why it's funny. 28 years later, in 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall in London. This actually happened. The hip-hop group and the symphony orchestra shared a stage and performed together. 28 years after The Simpsons wrote it as a joke. There is no clean explanation for this one. Trump was already flirting with politics. Disney buying Fox followed obvious market trends. Smartwatches were a natural extension of existing technology. But a specific hip-hop group performing with a specific symphony orchestra at a specific historic venue nearly 3 decades after a cartoon made it up as a throwaway gag? That's the kind of coincidence that makes you wonder if the writers really do have a crystal ball hidden somewhere in the writing room. They don't, of course. But the Cypress Hill prediction is proof that when you write enough jokes about enough topics for enough years, reality will eventually wander into your punchline. It's not prophecy, it's persistence, and it's one of the strangest footnotes in the history of television comedy. If The Simpsons can accidentally predict the future with disturbing accuracy, you'd think the show would at least be able to keep track of its own past. But it can't, because the internal logic of The Simpsons is so broken, so contradictory, and so fundamentally incoherent after 37 seasons that the show's own timeline doesn't make sense anymore. And the plot holes run deeper than you think. If you're into lore breakdowns where the writers clearly stopped keeping notes, keep watching. Because we're about to walk through every major plot hole in The Simpsons, and some of these are so bad they retroactively break episodes you thought were airtight. Let's start with the most fundamental problem the show has, the one that affects every single episode that has ever aired and ever will air: the floating timeline. The Simpsons premiered on December 17, 1989. In the first episode, Bart is 10 years old. Homer is roughly 36. Marge is around 34. Lisa is 8. Maggie is 1. And here we are, 37 seasons later, and none of them have aged a single day. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Homer is still somewhere in his mid to late 30s. Maggie still can't talk. They are locked in a permanent present tense that never moves forward. Now on its own, that's not a plot hole. Plenty of animated shows freeze their characters in time. Charlie Brown was a kid for 50 years. But The Simpsons does something that those other shows don't. It references real-world events as they happen. And that creates a problem that gets worse with every passing year. In the early seasons, Homer and Marge's backstory was set in the 1970s. They met in high school in the late 70s, fell in love, and had Bart in the early 80s. This was established in The Way We Was, a Season 2 flashback episode that showed a young Homer with a full head of hair listening to Debbie Harry and getting detention. The timeline made sense in 1991. Homer was about 36, which meant he was a teenager in the late 70s. Math checks out, but the show kept going. And as it entered the 2000s and 2010s, the flashback episodes had to adjust. Suddenly, Homer and Marge's high school years were in the 1990s, then the 2000s. A later flashback shows Homer as a teenager in the early 90s, grunge era, listening to Nirvana and hanging out at raves. In another episode, Homer is shown proposing to Marge while they watch a movie that didn't exist until the mid-90s. The show rewrites its own history every few years to keep the characters' ages consistent with the present day. And the result is a timeline that contradicts itself dozens of times over. Homer has been a teenager in at least 4 different decades, depending on which episode you watch. Bart has been born in the mid-80s, the early 90s, and the late 90s. The house at 742 Evergreen Terrace has existed in a world where cell phones don't exist, and in a world where everyone has smartphones. The same characters live in a pre-internet Springfield and a social media-obsessed Springfield simultaneously. None of it adds up because it was never designed to add up. The show prioritizes jokes over continuity, and after 37 seasons, the cracks aren't cracks anymore. They're canyons, and then there's the question that has haunted fans since the show began. Where is Springfield? The Simpsons takes place in a town called Springfield, that much is clear. But the show has never officially confirmed which state Springfield is in. This is intentional. Matt Groening named the town after Springfield, Oregon, which is near his hometown of Portland. But within the show, Springfield has been placed in at least a dozen different states depending on the episode. In the season 12 mockumentary episode Behind the Laughter, the narrator specifically mentions that the Simpson family lives in northern Kentucky. It's stated as a fact within the episode. But Behind the Laughter is framed as a parody of VH1's Behind the Music, and the entire episode is a joke about reality TV tropes. Some fans consider it canon. Others don't, and the show has never confirmed it one way or the other. What we do know is that Springfield is simultaneously near the ocean and in the middle of nowhere. It borders a desert and has snow in the winter. It has access to a major river and is close enough to a mountain range for skiing. The town is near enough to a major city for day trips, but isolated enough to be completely irrelevant to the rest of the country. Every geographic detail about Springfield contradicts at least one other geographic detail. The town exists in a superposition of all 50 states at once, and the show likes it that way. But the geographic confusion is nothing compared to the biological impossibility of Homer Simpson being alive. Because by any reasonable measure, Homer should have died hundreds of times over, and the show itself has acknowledged this. Remember what Lenny said in Homer's Enemy. He estimated that Homer had cheated death 316 times. That was in season 8. We are now in season 37. In the nearly 30 additional seasons since that line was written, Homer has fallen down Springfield Gorge and been airlifted out on a stretcher. He has been shot into space aboard a space shuttle. He has eaten the poisonous blowfish fugu and survived. He has been mauled by a bear, struck by lightning, electrocuted, run over by cars, and stabbed. He has had a crayon lodged in his brain for over 30 years. He works at a nuclear power plant with virtually no safety protocols, as his own safety report in the HOMR episode proved. The plant has had meltdowns. Homer has been directly responsible for many of them. And he's fine. He's always fine. The next morning he wakes up, eats a donut, goes to work, and the cycle resets. This is the fundamental rule of the Simpsons universe. Homer cannot die, not in the main canon. And while that makes for great comedy, it also means that every danger the show presents is a lie. There are no stakes in Springfield because the protagonist is immortal. Frank Grimes understood this, even if he couldn't articulate it. Homer Simpson is not a character who gets lucky. He's a character who exists in a universe designed to protect him at all costs. Grimes was the collateral damage of that protection. And this connects to another contradiction that has been bugging fans since the 1990s. The magic problem. The Simpsons operates on sitcom logic. Things happen because they're funny, not because they're plausible. Homer survives because the show needs him to. Bart never gets expelled because the show needs him in school. Burns is both 104 years old and physically active because the show needs a villain. All of this is understood and accepted by the audience because it's a cartoon. But the show occasionally introduces elements that break even the loose rules of cartoon logic. In multiple Treehouse of Horror episodes, the devil appears as a literal character, often resembling Ned Flanders or Moe. These episodes are non-canon, so they don't count. But in the main series, God has appeared as a speaking character on multiple occasions. In Homer the Heretic, a season 4 episode, Homer has a direct conversation with God. God has 5 fingers on The Simpsons, while every other character has 4. This is a canonical detail. The show has also featured functioning voodoo, genuine curses, and psychic visions in non-Treehouse episodes that are treated as real within the story. Nobody debunks them. Nobody explains them with science. They're just magic existing in a world that simultaneously insists everything is rational. The Simpsons wants to have it both ways. Magic is real when it's funny. Science is real when it's convenient. And the show never commits to either framework because committing would limit the jokes. After 37 seasons, the result is a universe where literally anything can happen and nothing has rules, which means nothing has meaning. Stakes require rules. Without rules, there are no consequences, and without consequences, there is no tension. The show knows this. It acknowledged it as early as season 8 with Homer's Enemy. And then it kept going for 29 more seasons without changing a thing. Speaking of things that don't change, let's talk about Homer's job, because this might be the single most logically indefensible element of the entire show. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant. He is responsible for ensuring that the facility operates within safety standards and that no catastrophic failures occur. This is a job that in the real world requires extensive education, certification, and ongoing training. It is arguably one of the most important jobs in any community that has a nuclear facility. A failure in the safety inspector's role could result in a meltdown that kills thousands of people. Homer got the job because Mr. Burns needed to fill a seat and Homer happened to be there. He has no qualifications. He sleeps at his post. He eats during emergencies. He has caused more accidents than any other employee in the history of the plant. And he has never been permanently fired. He has been fired in individual episodes, sure. But by the next episode, he's back at his desk, feet up, donut in hand, sleeping through another shift. And here's what makes it truly disturbing when you connect it to the HOMR episode. When Homer was smart, when the crayon was removed and he could actually do his job, the first thing he did was file a legitimate safety report with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that report was so damning that the NRC shut the entire plant down. Every employee lost their job. The town was devastated. What this means is that every single day Homer is dumb, which is every day of the regular series, the Springfield nuclear power plant is operating in violation of federal safety standards. The plant is dangerous. Homer's incompetence is not just a character trait, it's a public health crisis. And every person in Springfield knows it, including the regulatory agencies that are supposed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. They know and they do nothing. Because Springfield runs on inertia. The machine keeps going because nobody has the will to stop it. This is the same logic that killed Frank Grimes. The universe of The Simpsons is not designed to reward competence or punish failure. It's designed to maintain the status quo at any cost. Homer keeps his job because the show needs him to have a job. Burns keeps the plant open because the show needs a plant. The town tolerates a dangerous nuclear facility because shutting it down would change the fundamental structure of the show. And so every day in the fictional town of Springfield, millions of fictional people live under the shadow of a nuclear disaster being managed by a man with a crayon stuck in his brain who sleeps through his shifts and has caused more accidents than the NRC has forms for. If that's not disturbing lore, nothing is. But we're not done, because there are a few more contradictions in this show that go beyond plot holes and enter the realm of genuine philosophical problems. And they all come back to one question that The Simpsons has been dodging for 37 years. Does any of this matter? Before we answer that, there's one more plot hole that needs addressing. One that fans have been fighting about since 1997, and that fundamentally changed how the show treated its own continuity. The Skinner problem. In season 9, the show aired an episode called The Principal and the Pauper. In it, we learn that Principal Seymour Skinner, the uptight, by-the-book school administrator who has been a fixture of the show since the very beginning, is not actually Seymour Skinner. He's an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He was a street punk who served in Vietnam alongside the real Seymour Skinner, took his identity when the real one was presumed dead, moved to Springfield, and has been living a lie ever since. The real Skinner shows up, played as a much more confident and competent man, and for the duration of the episode, the fake Skinner's entire life falls apart. His identity is exposed. The town turns on him. Agnes Skinner, his mother, rejects him. Everything he built was based on a stolen name and a borrowed life. At the end of the episode, the town decides they don't care. They prefer the fake Skinner because he's the one they know. The real Skinner is put on a bus and sent out of town, and a judge orders that nobody is ever allowed to speak of the incident again, under penalty of torture. The status quo is restored by force, and the show pretends the whole thing never happened. Fans hated it. Critics called it one of the worst episodes of the Golden Era. The backlash was so intense that it became a turning point in how people talked about the show. For many fans, The Principal and the Paupers was the moment The Simpsons stopped respecting its own universe. It took a character with years of established backstory, a military veteran, a mama's boy, a man struggling with authority and inadequacy, and revealed that all of that was a fabrication. And then it undid the revelation in the most cynical way possible, by having the characters acknowledge the problem and choose to ignore it because dealing with it would be too inconvenient. The thing is, that episode perfectly describes how The Simpsons has handled its own continuity for the past 2 decades. Every time the show creates a contradiction, it either ignores it or lampshades it with a wink. Oh, you noticed that Bart's age doesn't make sense? Haha, we know. You noticed that Homer's backstory has been rewritten 4 times? Classic Simpsons. The show has become self-aware about its own lack of coherence, and it treats that self-awareness as a feature rather than a bug. But for a show that has generated some of the most emotionally resonant moments in television history, the refusal to take its own continuity seriously means that every emotional beat is built on sand. Remember HOMR, the crayon episode? That moment where Homer writes Lisa the letter before getting the crayon put back in his brain? One of the most beautiful scenes the show has ever done, and it means nothing. Because the next episode, Homer is back to being dumb, Lisa is back to being isolated, and neither of them ever references the letter again. The emotional weight of that scene exists in a vacuum. It doesn't change anything. It can't. Because the show needs Homer to be dumb and Lisa to be lonely. If they actually grew from that experience, the show would have to evolve. And The Simpsons does not evolve. It resets. This is the central paradox of the show. It is capable of producing moments of genuine emotional power, moments that rival the best drama on television, and then it deliberately erases those moments so the next episode can start from zero. Every character revelation is temporary. Every growth is reversed. Every lesson is forgotten. And after 37 seasons, the cumulative effect of all that erasure is a universe where nothing that happens actually matters. Homer will always be dumb, Bart will always be in 4th grade, Lisa will always be lonely, and Springfield will always be one donut away from disaster. Now, before we close this out, there are 2 more pieces of disturbing lore that sit outside the episodes themselves, but inside the DNA of the show. 2 controversies that changed The Simpsons forever and revealed uncomfortable truths about what the show is and what it represents. The first is the Apu controversy. For 29 years, Apu Nahasa P. Mapetilan was one of the most recognizable characters on the show. He was the Indian immigrant who ran the Quick E-Mart, worked impossibly long hours, raised octoplets, and served as a comedic fixture of Springfield's landscape. He was voiced by Hank Azaria, who is not Indian. Azaria used an exaggerated Indian accent that was, depending on your perspective, either an affectionate caricature or a racist stereotype that shaped how an entire generation of Americans perceived South Asian people. In 2017, comedian Hari Kondabolu released a documentary called The Problem with Apu. It explored how the character had impacted South Asian Americans, many of whom grew up being called Apu by classmates, being asked to do the voice, being reduced to a cartoon stereotype in the eyes of their peers. The documentary sparked a national conversation about representation in media, and it put The Simpsons squarely in the crosshairs. The show's initial response was not great. In a season 29 episode called No Good Read Goes Unpunished, which aired in April 2018, Lisa breaks the 4th wall and looks directly at the camera to say that some things in the show were considered acceptable in the past, but aren't anymore. She then looks at a photo of Apu on her bedside table and says, "What can you do?" The scene was interpreted by many as dismissive, as the show shrugging off legitimate criticism rather than engaging with it. The backlash to the backlash was intense. Hank Azaria eventually announced in January 2020 that he would no longer voice Apu. The character has been largely phased out of the show since then. He occasionally appears in the background, but he doesn't speak, and there are no current plans to recast him that have been publicly confirmed. Apu, one of the most prominent characters in the show's history, was effectively silenced. This is its own kind of disturbing lore. Not because the criticism was wrong, the conversation about representation was necessary and overdue, but because of what it revealed about the show's relationship with its own past. The Simpsons created Apu in 1990 without thinking about the consequences. They kept him going for nearly 3 decades without thinking about the consequences. And when the consequences finally arrived, their first instinct was to brush them off with a joke. When that didn't work, they didn't reimagine the character or find a way to evolve him. They just stopped using him. Apu's story isn't a resolution, it's an amputation. And then there's the Homer strangling Bart issue. This is a gag that has been in the show since the very first season. Homer gets angry. Homer grabs Bart by the neck. Homer strangles him. Bart's eyes bulge. The audience laughs. It's been one of the most iconic recurring bits in the entire series. In 2024, a season 35 episode appeared to reference the choking gag in a way that suggested the show might be retiring it. Fans speculated that The Simpsons was finally acknowledging that a grown man repeatedly strangling his child might not be the kind of comedy that plays in the 2000s the way it did in 1989. The discussion was widespread, think pieces were written, social media debated whether the show was being too woke or not woke enough. And then executive producer James L. Brooks, one of the most senior creative voices in the show's history, shut the whole thing down. He said, and this was reported widely, "Don't think for a second we're changing anything. The strangling stays. On one hand, this is a show defending its identity. The Simpsons has always been transgressive. It was controversial from the very beginning. In the early 1990s, schools banned Bart Simpson t-shirts. President George H.W. Bush said American families should be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. The show responded by having Bart say they're just like the Waltons because they're praying for an end to the Depression too. The Simpsons has never and the emotional damage that careless parents inflict on their children. And in that same show, the default response to conflict between father and son is physical violence played for laughs. The show wants Homer to be a sympathetic figure and a man who routinely chokes his 10-year-old son. It wants you to cry when Homer writes Lisa a letter and laugh when he wraps his hands around Bart's throat. Both things exist in the same universe, produced by the same writers for the same audience. And the show has decided it doesn't need to reconcile them. This is the final layer of disturbing lore. Not the episodes, not the deaths, not the predictions or the plot holes. It's the fact that The Simpsons has been around so long that it has become a mirror for every uncomfortable conversation American culture has tried to have over the past 3.5 decades. Race, violence, mental health, disability, corporate consolidation, the death of meritocracy, the relationship between intelligence and happiness, the question of whether growth is possible or whether we're all just running in place. The show has touched all of these themes, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes clumsily, and it has never been forced to answer for any of them because the next episode always resets the board. That's the real disturbing lore of The Simpsons. Not that the show is secretly dark, it's that the show is openly, obviously, transparently dark, and has been for 37 years, and most people have just accepted it because the jokes are good and the characters are yellow and the theme song is catchy. We've been watching a show about a man with brain damage strangle his son in a town where meritocracy is a death sentence, and the nuclear plant is one sleeping safety inspector away from killing everyone. And we've been laughing the whole time. Frank Grimes was right. He just couldn't survive being right in a universe that punishes you for noticing. But we're not done yet, because there's an entire layer of Simpsons lore that most people skip right past. The one-time characters. The people who show up for a single episode, make an impact, and then vanish into the void as if they never existed. Some of them are jokes, some of them are genuinely compelling characters who deserve more than 22 minutes of screen time, and the way the show discards them tells you everything about how Springfield really works. Let's start with one that a lot of people have forgotten, Hank Scorpio. He appeared in one episode, Season 8, Episode 2, You Only Move Twice. Hank Scorpio was Homer's boss at a new company called Globex Corporation. He was charming, supportive, gave Homer a great job with excellent benefits, and took a genuine interest in helping the Simpson family adjust to their new life in a beautiful planned community called Cypress Creek. He was also a supervillain trying to take over the east coast of the United States. The brilliance of the episode is that Homer never figures this out. Scorpio is launching attacks on the United Nations, holding world governments hostage, and commanding a private army of mercenaries. And Homer just thinks he's a really cool boss. When Homer asks for sugar for his coffee, Scorpio takes him to an office supply room where a man is clearly being tortured in the background, and Homer doesn't even notice. At the end of the episode, Homer leaves Globex to move the family back to Springfield because Marge and the kids are unhappy, and Scorpio, as a farewell gift, conquers the entire East Coast and gives Homer the Denver Broncos. Homer wanted the Dallas Cowboys. Hank Scorpio is consistently ranked as one of the greatest one-time characters in television history. Albert Brooks voiced him in a performance so good that fans have been begging for a return episode for nearly 30 years. It has never happened. Scorpio appeared once, stole the show, and disappeared. The east coast of the United States is presumably still under his control. Nobody in Springfield has ever mentioned it again. And then there's Frank Grimes Jr., because apparently Frank Grimes' tragedy wasn't complete with just his own death. In Season 14, Episode 6, The Great Louse Detective, Homer starts receiving anonymous death threats. The police bring in Sideshow Bob, of all people, to help investigate this, and the person trying to kill Homer turns out to be Frank Grimes Jr., the illegitimate son of Frank Grimes Sr., who was conceived with a woman the show describes only as an unknown relationship. Frank Jr. has spent his entire life knowing that his father was driven to madness and death by Homer Simpson, and he wants revenge. Think about that for a second. Frank Grimes died in Season 8. 6 seasons later, the show introduced his son specifically to demonstrate that the damage Homer causes doesn't end when the credits roll. Frank Grimes Sr. didn't just die. He left behind a child who grew up knowing that his father was destroyed by a man who never faced consequences. And what does the show do with this revelation? It uses it as a punchline. Frank Jr. fails to kill Homer, he gets arrested, and nobody ever mentions him or his father again. 2 generations of the Grimes family destroyed by Homer Simpson, and the show treats both of them as disposable comedic props. This is the pattern. Springfield chews people up and spits them out. Characters arrive with backstories, motivations, and emotional depth, and the show uses them for a single episode before dropping them into the void. The few that survive do so only because the writers like them enough to bring them back. Sideshow Bob got lucky. Hank Scorpio did not. Frank Grimes definitely did not. And this pattern extends beyond one-time characters to the show's treatment of its own permanent cast. Because if you look closely at what The Simpsons has done to its supporting characters over 37 seasons, the picture is bleak. Look at what happened to Ned Flanders. Before Maude's death, Ned was the happiest man in Springfield. Annoying, sure. Overly religious, absolutely. But genuinely happy. He had a loving wife, 2 devoted sons, a successful business, and an unshakable faith that the world was fundamentally good. Then the show killed Maude for a pay dispute. Ned became a grieving widower. He started dating awkwardly. He got involved with Edna Krabappel, which gave him a second chance at love, and then the actress died, and Edna was retired. Ned lost 2 partners, one to the writers and one to reality. And his character has been stuck in a holding pattern of low-grade melancholy ever since. Look at what happened to Mr. Burns. In the early seasons, Burns was a genuine threat, a corporate monster with real power and real menace. He blocked out the sun. He tried to steal the Loch Ness Monster. He was shot by Maggie Simpson in a cliffhanger that dominated national conversation for an entire summer. But as the show went on, Burns became less threatening and more pathetic. His age went from a running gag to his entire personality. He's 104 years old, and the show treats him less like a villain and more like a punchline. The man who once blocked out the sun now struggles to open a door. Look at what happened to Bart. In the first few seasons, Bart Simpson was the most famous fictional child in America. His face was on every lunchbox, every t-shirt, every piece of merchandise the show could produce. Schools banned his image. Parents blamed him for corrupting their children. He was the protagonist, the rebel, the kid who said, "Eat my shorts," and meant it. And over time, the show shifted its focus. Homer became the star, Lisa became the moral center, and Bart became, well, just a troublemaker. His role in the show shrunk. His emotional arcs got rarer. He went from being the character the show was named after to the character the show didn't quite know what to do with anymore. And look at Lisa, maybe the most tragic case of all, because unlike the others, Lisa's tragedy is fully intentional. The show knows exactly what it's doing to her. Lisa Simpson is the smartest person in Springfield. She is ethical, compassionate, creative, and driven. She cares about justice. She fights for the environment. She reads books that no one else in her family can even pronounce the titles of. And the show rewards her for this by making her the loneliest character in the series. Bleeding gums. Murphy, the one adult who truly understood her, died in season 6 and was never replaced. Her father briefly connected with her during the crayon episode and then chose to become stupid again. Her brother torments her. Her mother loves her but can't relate to her intellectually. Her classmates mock her. Springfield as a whole doesn't value intelligence, doesn't value creativity, and doesn't value the kind of person Lisa is trying to be. And the show has been consistent about this for 37 years. Lisa will never be happy in Springfield. She's too smart for her environment, and her environment will never change. This is what makes The Simpsons genuinely disturbing once you stop seeing it as just a comedy. It's not a show about a family growing and learning. It's a show about a family trapped in a loop. Homer will always be dumb, Bart will always be 10, Lisa will always be lonely, Marge will always be holding the family together while no one acknowledges the weight she carries. Maggie will never grow up, and Springfield will keep going, absorbing tragedies and controversies and deaths and contradictions without ever fundamentally changing. The show has been renewed through season 40. That's at least 3 more seasons beyond where we are now. By the time it finishes its current contract, The Simpsons will have been on the air for approximately 37 years. If you're generous with the math, possibly closer to 40 depending on scheduling. It will have produced close to 900 episodes. It has already surpassed every record for the longest-running American animated program and the longest-running American sitcom of any kind. It will outlast most of the people reading about it right now. And when it ends, whenever that is, every character will be exactly where they were on December 17th, 1989. Homer at the plant, Bart in 4th grade, Lisa playing her saxophone alone, Marge in the kitchen, Maggie silent. There was an episode in season 36 called Bart's Birthday where the show played with the idea of doing a series finale. It was framed as a parody, an AI-generated version of what a Simpsons ending would look like, and it deliberately invoked the question of what happens when the show stops. In the AI-generated fake finale, Bart turns 11. Characters who died, including Frank Grimes, Rabbi Krastofsky, and Bleeding Gums Murphy, show up at his party. Bart, confused, points out that they're supposed to be dead. It was played for laughs. But underneath the joke was an acknowledgement that The Simpsons exists in a world where death and time don't work the way they're supposed to. Characters die and come back. Characters age and don't age. The show has broken every rule of serialized storytelling and replaced them with a single principle. The status quo must be maintained at all costs. And that, right there, is the most disturbing piece of Simpsons lore there is. Not the deaths, not the banned episode, not the predictions or the plot holes or the treehouse of horror segments where 8-year-old Lisa becomes a serial killer. All of those are individual moments, shocking when you encounter them, but contained. They start and they end. The truly disturbing thing is the permanence. The Simpsons is a show about a family that cannot change, living in a town that cannot evolve, surrounded by people who cannot grow, airing on a network that cannot let it end. Every emotional breakthrough is reversed. Every death is absorbed. Every controversy is addressed and then forgotten. The show is a closed loop, a temporal prison. Springfield is not a town, it's a cage. And the characters inside it have been running on the same hamster wheel since 1989. Homer will never get the crayon removed permanently. Lisa will never find someone who truly understands her. Frank Grimes will never get justice. Maude will never come back. Phil Hartman's characters will never speak again. And the show will keep going, churning out episodes, rebooting its own past, pretending that everything is fine, because the alternative is admitting that 37 years of laughing at a man with brain damage might have been a little more disturbing than anyone was willing to admit. That's the lore, all of it. The dark episodes, the real-world tragedies, the non-canon horror segments, the accidental prophecies, the bottomless plot holes, and the existential dread of a show that can never stop. The Simpsons is not just a comedy. It is the longest-running meditation on stagnation in the history of American entertainment. And the punchline, if there is one, is that we watched the whole thing and called it comfort television. But before we truly close this out, there are a few more characters who deserve their turn under the microscope. Because the disturbing lore of The Simpsons isn't just about the big moments, it's also in the details. The quiet, horrible things the show tells you about its characters without ever stopping to acknowledge how sad they really are. Let's talk about Moe Seislak. Moe is the bartender at Moe's Tavern, the bar where Homer, Lenny, Carl, and Barney spend most of their free time. On the surface, Moe is a comedic character. He's ugly, he's rude, he gets prank called by Bart and falls for it every single time. He's the guy who threatens people with a shotgun and then immediately backs down when someone challenges him. He's comic relief. But if you actually pay attention to what the show tells you about Mo over 37 seasons, the picture is one of the bleakest character portraits in the entire series. Mo is deeply, profoundly lonely. He has never had a lasting romantic relationship. Multiple episodes show him attempting to find love and failing miserably, not because he's a bad person, but because he has crippling insecurity, a face that the show itself describes as horrifying, and a personality shaped by decades of rejection. And the show has gone further than that. On multiple occasions, the show has directly implied or outright stated that Mo is suicidal. He has made references to ending his life. He has been shown preparing to do so. These moments are played for comedy, a quick gag, a dark joke, a cut to the next scene. But if you string them all together across 37 seasons, you get a portrait of a man in genuine psychological crisis that the show has been mining for laughs since the early 90s. Nobody in Springfield intervenes. Homer, who drinks at Moe's bar almost every day, never addresses it. The other barflies treat it as background noise. And the audience, trained by decades of sitcom conventions, laughs because the show tells us to laugh. Moe's suffering is the punchline. It has been the punchline for over 3 decades. And the fact that nobody within the show or outside of it treats this as alarming is its own kind of disturbing commentary on how we normalize pain when it comes from someone we don't take seriously. And then there's Barney Gumble. Barney was Homer's best friend in high school. In flashback episodes set before the show's timeline, Barney is shown as a bright, promising young man with aspirations and talent. He had a future. And then Homer introduced him to beer. There's a specific scene in one of the flashback episodes where Homer hands Barney his first beer, and in real time, you watch the light go out of his eyes. From that moment on, Barney becomes the town drunk. He's the guy slumped over the bar at Moe's, belching, stumbling, and providing comic relief through his own destruction. The show did give Barney a redemption arc. In season 11, there's an episode where Barney gets sober. He starts drinking coffee instead of beer. He becomes articulate, productive, and even wins a film festival with a documentary about his own alcoholism. For a brief, shining moment, Barney Gumble is the person he was always supposed to be. And then the show undid it. In later seasons, Barney slips back into alcoholism. The growth is reversed. The recovery is canceled. The show needed Barney to be the drunk guy at the bar because that's his function in the machine. His sobriety was a plot device, not a character development. And when the plot was done with it, so was the show. This is the same thing that happened to Homer in the HOMR episode. Growth followed by reversal. A glimpse of what a character could be if they were allowed to change, followed by a hard reset to the factory settings. The Simpsons shows you the door and then slams it shut, every time. And while we're talking about characters trapped in loops, we need to address the most persistent one of all. Sideshow Bob, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger, the man who has tried to kill Bart Simpson more times than anyone can count and has never once succeeded. Sideshow Bob started as Krusty the Clown's sidekick. He was a cultured, intelligent man performing slapstick comedy for a children's television show, getting hit with pies and shot out of cannons. He framed Krusty for armed robbery. He was caught by Bart and Lisa. He went to prison. And from that moment on, his entire existence has been defined by one objective: kill Bart Simpson. He has tried stabbing, he has tried explosives, he has tried poison, he has manipulated the legal system, faked his own death, moved to Italy, married a woman for strategic purposes, and orchestrated elaborate revenge schemes that span entire episodes. In Cape Fear, widely considered one of the best episodes in the series, Bob follows the Simpson family into witness protection, hides under their car, gets dragged along the highway, gets hit in the face by rakes 9 consecutive times, and still nearly kills Bart before being undone by his own ego when Bart tricks him into performing the entire score of the HMS Pinafore on a houseboat. Sideshow Bob is a genius. His IQ is shown to be vastly superior to most characters on the show. He quotes Shakespeare, he appreciates opera, he has a legitimate grievance against the entertainment industry that reduced him to a prop. And yet the show has condemned him to an eternal cycle of plot, attempt, fail, prison, release, plot again. He cannot evolve past his obsession with Bart. He cannot find peace. He cannot let go. And the show cannot let him succeed because if Bob ever actually killed Bart, the series would change irrevocably. So Bob is stuck, just like Homer is stuck being dumb. Just like Lisa is stuck being lonely. Just like Marge is stuck in the kitchen. Sideshow. Bob is stuck trying to murder a 10-year-old boy who will never age and who can never actually die. It's a Greek tragedy rendered in animation, played for laughs, and reset every time the credits roll. Bob steps on rakes, the audience laughs, Bob goes back to prison, and the wheel keeps turning. There's one more moment from the show that we need to talk about before we get to Marge, because it's probably the most famous single image The Simpsons has ever produced, and most people don't realize how dark it actually is. In the season 6 episode And Maggie Makes 3, the show tells the story of Maggie's birth through flashback. Before Maggie was born, Homer had finally achieved his dream. He had quit his job at the nuclear plant and gotten hired at a bowling alley. For the first time in his adult life, Homer was happy at work. He was good at his job. He liked the people. He was smiling. And then Marge told him she was pregnant. Another child meant another mouth to feed, which meant Homer couldn't survive on a bowling alley salary. He had to go back to the nuclear plant. He had to crawl back to Mr. Burns and beg for his old job. Burns agrees, but only on one condition. He places a plaque on the wall of Homer's workstation that reads, "Don't forget, you're here forever." It's a reminder, a punishment, a permanent declaration that Homer will never escape. He is trapped in this building, doing a job he hates, for the rest of his life. But in the final scene of the episode, the show reveals that Homer has covered parts of the plaque with photographs of Maggie. The photos are arranged so that the visible letters now spell out "Do it for her." It is one of the most beautiful visual gags in television history. It is also one of the most heartbreaking, because what that scene really shows you is a man who has accepted his prison. Homer doesn't remove the plaque. He doesn't deface it. He doesn't fight against Burns' cruelty. He covers it up with pictures of the reason he can't leave. Maggie isn't just his motivation, she's his cage. He loves her more than anything, and that love is exactly what keeps him chained to a job that is slowly killing him at a plant that is one inspection away from being shut down. "Do it for her" isn't just a heartwarming message, it's a life sentence reframed as a love note. The Simpsons is full of moments like this, moments that look beautiful on the surface and unravel into something much darker when you sit with them. And most people never sit with them because the show moves on so fast. The next joke arrives, the next gag lands, the music swells, the credits roll. And whatever truth was briefly visible in the gap between the setup and the punchline disappears before you can examine it closely. And nobody gets this treatment worse than Marge. Marge Simpson is the most underappreciated character in the history of the show. She is the only reason the Simpson family functions at all. She manages the household. She raises 3 children, one of whom is a borderline delinquent, and another who is an emotionally distant genius. She tolerates a husband who is absent, selfish, destructive, and routinely endangers the family through his own incompetence. She does all of this without complaint, without help, and without recognition. And the show knows this. Multiple episodes have explored Marge's frustration, her dreams, her ambitions, and the life she might have had if she hadn't married Homer. She was a talented artist. She had aspirations beyond Springfield. She once ran a successful business. She has shown repeatedly that she is capable, intelligent, and resourceful. And every single time, the episode ends with Marge back in the kitchen, back in the routine, back to holding the family together while nobody thanks her. There's an episode in season 35 where Marge experiences empty nest syndrome, realizing that her entire identity has been consumed by her role as mother and wife. She doesn't know who she is outside of the family. She has no hobbies that survive motherhood, no friendships that aren't tied to Homer's social life, no career, no independence. She is completely defined by her function within the household. And the show treats this as a temporary emotional episode rather than the catastrophic realization that it actually is. Marge is trapped, not by Homer specifically, although Homer's behavior certainly makes things worse. She's trapped by the structure of the show itself. The Simpsons needs Marge to be the anchor. Without her, the family disintegrates. And so the show can never let her leave, never let her grow, never let her pursue the life she glimpses in those rare episodes where she gets to be something other than Homer's wife. She is the most essential character in the series and the one with the least freedom. That's not a comedy setup. That's a prison sentence disguised as a marriage. Now let's go back to the Treehouse of Horror for a few more segments that deserve attention. Because we covered the big ones, Treehouse of Horror 5, the Maggie Antichrist segment, the Homer virus, and Lisa's murder spree. But there are a handful of other segments scattered across 36 Treehouse specials that push the boundaries of what a family show is allowed to do. In Treehouse of Horror 15, there's a segment called the Ned Zone, which is a parody of the Dead Zone. Ned Flanders gets hit on the head by a bowling ball that Homer throws while trying to get a frisbee off the roof. When Ned wakes up in the hospital, he discovers he can see how people die just by touching them. He touches Dr. Hibbert and has a vision of Hibbert falling out of a window. Seconds later, Homer asks Hibbert to retrieve his frisbee from the window ledge, and Hibbert falls to his death. Ned tries to use his power to save people, but every intervention just redirects the death to a new target. He saves Hans Moleman from falling off a telephone line, only to drop him into a manhole full of alligators. The power doesn't let you prevent death. It just lets you watch it happen from a better angle. In Treehouse of Horror 11, there's a segment called Night of the Dolphin. Lisa frees a dolphin from a marine park. The dolphin turns out to be the king of all dolphins. He rallies every dolphin on Earth into an organized military force, and they invade the land. They take over Springfield, they take over the world. Humanity is driven into the ocean. The dolphins literally reverse the evolutionary hierarchy, forcing humans to live in the sea while dolphins walk on land. It's a complete extinction event for human civilization, triggered by Lisa's compassion for a single animal. The message, if there is one, is that even good intentions can end the world if you don't think through the consequences. In Treehouse of Horror 29, there's a segment that parodies Invasion of the Body Snatchers by way of an Apple product launch. An underwater Apple store, run by a clone of Steve Jobs, releases a new phone that transforms everyone who uses it into plant aliens. The invasion spreads through consumer technology. People are literally consumed by their devices. Bart and Lisa try to escape, but the infestation is total. The segment ends with the reveal that the townspeople are transported to a utopian dimension by the plants, which sounds nice until you remember that their bodies were destroyed in the process. They're not rescued, they're replaced. The plants consume the original and create a copy in paradise. Is that salvation or annihilation? The episode doesn't answer, it just moves on. And in Treehouse of Horror 27, there's a segment called Dry Hard that reimagines the Hunger Games in a drought-stricken Springfield. Mr. Burns controls all the remaining water and forces children from each neighborhood to fight to the death in a gladiatorial arena. The winner gets a day at Burns's personal reservoir. Ralph Wiggum dies before the event even starts by stepping out of bounds and getting blown up. Lisa convinces the other children to stop fighting and turn against Burns. They destroy the reservoir, freeing the water, which causes a rain, which causes a flood, which causes an ice age. Springfield goes from drought to extinction in about 45 seconds. These segments all share the same DNA. They take a recognizable pop culture premise, filter it through Springfield's cast of characters, and push it to its most extreme conclusion. The Treehouse of Horror doesn't do happy endings, it doesn't do moral lessons. It doesn't even do narrative closure in the traditional sense. What it does is strip away the safety net that the main show provides and show you what The Simpsons would look like if consequences were real and nobody was protected by plot armor. And the answer, consistently across 36 years of Halloween specials, is that Springfield would destroy itself almost immediately. The only thing keeping these characters alive is the fact that their show won't let them die. And the strangest part of all of this is that the show is aware of it. The Simpsons has been self-referential about its own longevity, its declining quality, and its refusal to end for over a decade now. There are episodes where characters break the fourth wall to acknowledge that the show has been on too long. There are couch gags that reference the show's own irrelevance. There was an entire episode built around an AI writing a Simpsons episode that was better than what the human writers could produce, which is either a joke or a cry for help, depending on how you read it. The show has even acknowledged the cultural conversation around its own decline. There's a commonly cited dividing line in the Simpsons fan community between the golden era, which most fans place roughly between seasons 3 and 8, and everything that came after. Seasons 9 and 10 are often called the transition period, where the writing began to shift in tone and approach. Seasons 11 and 12 under showrunner Mike Scully are where many fans believe the quality dropped sharply and the character dynamics that made the show special began to erode. Homer became what critics called jerkass Homer, a more aggressively stupid and inconsiderate version of the character that prioritized shock value and outlandish behavior over the warmth and emotional nuance that had defined the earlier years. Plots became wackier and more reliant on gimmicks and guest appearances. The emotional groundedness that defined the golden era gave way to absurdist premises, gratuitous celebrity cameos, and stories that felt increasingly disconnected from the character-driven heart that had made the show matter in the first place. The lowest rated episode in the show's entire history on IMDb is Lisa Goes Gaga from season 23, where Lady Gaga visits Springfield and helps Lisa with her self-esteem. It sits at roughly a 3.9 to 4.5 rating, making it the only Simpsons episode to dip below a 5. For context, the highest rated episode, Homer's Enemy, the Frank Grimes episode we talked about at the very beginning of this video, sits at a 9.3. The gap between the show's best and worst is over 5 full points. That's not a decline, that's a free fall. But here's the thing, even in its weakest seasons, The Simpsons occasionally produces something that reminds you why it matters. A Serious Flanders in season 33 was a 2-part crime drama pastiche that felt completely unlike anything the show had done in years. It was dark, stylish, and genuinely tense. The show proved it could still surprise. And then the next week, it went back to standard episodes and the moment passed. This is the cycle. Decline, followed by a flash of brilliance, followed by more decline, followed by another flash. The show can't sustain quality the way it did in the 90s, but it can still access it in bursts. And those bursts are just frequent enough to keep people watching, keep critics debating, and keep the show alive. It's a zombie in the best and worst sense. Dead in the ways that matter, but still walking, still talking, still producing content that occasionally, accidentally reminds you it was once the greatest show on television. The Simpsons has also left a footprint in video games that most people forget about. The Simpsons Hit and Run, released in 2003, was an open-world driving game in the style of Grand Theft Auto, set in a fully realized version of Springfield. It became a cult classic. Fans have been requesting a remaster for over 2 decades. It remains one of the most beloved licensed video games ever made. And the thing that made it work was the same thing that makes the show work at its best. It treated Springfield as a real place with geography, history, and character. You could drive through the streets, visit Moe's Tavern, explore the power plant, and feel like you were inside the show. It was immersive in a way that the actual show, locked into its 22-minute format, could never fully achieve. There was also The Simpsons Tapped Out, a mobile city building game that ran from 2012 to 2024. 12 years, it was a freemium game where players rebuilt Springfield from scratch, placing buildings, completing quests, and collecting characters. It generated substantial revenue for EA and was updated regularly with content from new episodes. And when it finally shut down in 2024, it took with it a version of Springfield that millions of players had spent years building. Their towns were gone, their progress erased. The game that let you control Springfield was, in the end, just as impermanent as the show itself. And in 2025, The Simpsons crossed over with Fortnite. There was a Simpsons-themed season with playable characters, animated shorts, and a fully explorable Springfield Island map. The Simpsons, a show that started in 1989 as a subversive counterpoint to squeaky clean family entertainment, was now a skin pack in a battle royale game played primarily by children born after the show's golden era ended. The Ouroboros had completed its loop. The show that once mocked merchandising had become the merchandise. All of which brings us to the question that has been hanging over this entire video. But before we truly wrap this up, there are a few final pieces of disturbing Simpsons lore that deserve their moment. Small things, details that most people walk right past. But once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's talk about Jebediah Springfield. Every town has a founding myth, and Springfield's is one of the darkest in the show's history. Jebediah, Obadiah, Zachariah. Jebediah Springfield is the founder of the town. His statue stands in the town square. He's revered as a hero, a pioneer, a man of courage and vision. Every citizen of Springfield has grown up hearing stories about his bravery. He's the foundation of the town's identity, and he was a fraud. In the season 7 episode, Lisa the Iconoclast, Lisa discovers the truth about Jebediah Springfield while researching a school project. The real Jebediah was a vicious pirate named Hans Sprungfeld. He was a murderer and a con artist who attacked George Washington and nearly killed him. His famous quote about Springfield being a land of noble spirit was fabricated. The entire history of the town is built on a lie told by a criminal who reinvented himself to escape justice. Lisa finds proof. A document hidden inside the Jebediah Springfield statue confirms everything. She has the evidence. She could expose the truth and force the town to confront the fact that their hero was a monster. And she chooses not to. She looks at the crowd gathered for the Jebediah Springfield celebration, sees how much the myth means to them, and decides that the truth would do more harm than good. She burns the evidence. The lie survives. On the surface, this is a story about a child learning that the world is complicated and that truth isn't always the right weapon. But underneath that, it's something much more unsettling. Lisa, the character defined by her commitment to honesty and justice, looks at a fundamental lie at the heart of her community and decides to let it stand. She becomes complicit in the deception. And the show frames this as growth, as maturity, as the moment Lisa learns that sometimes the noble thing is to let people keep their illusions. But think about what that actually means within the context of Springfield. The town worships a pirate. Its entire cultural identity is based on a fiction. And the one person smart enough and brave enough to expose the truth chose silence. If that isn't a metaphor for The Simpsons itself, a show that has been entertaining audiences with comfortable fictions while hiding disturbing truths underneath the surface for 37 years, I don't know what is. And then there's Larry the Barfly. Most people don't even know his name. Larry was a background character who sat at Moe's Tavern for decades. He didn't have memorable lines, he didn't have storylines, he was just there, part of the furniture. One of those faces you recognize without ever thinking about. In season 35, the show killed him. The episode is called Cremains of the Day. Larry dies, and the episode explores what happens when a background character, someone who existed on the periphery of the main cast's lives for years, suddenly isn't there anymore. Homer realizes he knew almost nothing about Larry. None of the Barflies did. The man sat next to them for years, and they never learned his story. His death forces them to confront the fact that they shared space with someone for decades without ever really seeing him. It's a meta-commentary on how the show itself treats its minor characters. Larry existed in the background of hundreds of episodes. He was drawn, animated, placed in scenes, and never given a voice. And when the show finally decided to acknowledge him, it was only to kill him and use his death as a vehicle for the main character's growth. Even in death, Larry was a prop. His life mattered only because his absence created an opportunity for Homer to have a moment of self-reflection that, like every other moment of self-reflection Homer has ever had, will be completely forgotten by the next episode. Now let's talk about one more thing before we close this out. The Simpsons movie. Because the film, which came out in 2007, is essentially the show's apocalypse scenario. And the fact that it exists alongside the regular series creates one of the most interesting contradictions in the show's entire run. In The Simpsons movie, Homer dumps a silo full of pig waste into Lake Springfield, creating an environmental disaster so severe that the EPA places a giant glass dome over the entire town, sealing everyone inside. The government's plan is to destroy Springfield entirely. They literally plan to blow the town off the map. Homer, who caused the crisis, escapes with his family while everyone else is trapped. The town turns against him. His neighbors want him dead. Bart disowns him and briefly adopts Ned Flanders as a surrogate father. Marge leaves Homer a video message telling him their marriage is over. For 90 minutes, the movie does what the show almost never does. It lets actions have consequences. Homer's stupidity isn't just a running joke in the film. It nearly destroys an entire community. The townspeople don't just shrug it off. They want blood, and the emotional stakes are real in a way the weekly show almost never achieves. Homer has to genuinely earn his way back. He has to save Springfield, repair his marriage, and reconnect with his son, and he does. But then the movie ends, and the show continues, and nothing from the movie carries over. Springfield is back to normal. Homer is back to being Homer. Marge is back in the kitchen. Bart is back in 4th grade. The dome, the environmental disaster, the near destruction of the town, the emotional breakthroughs, all of it evaporates like it never happened. The The Simpsons movie proved that the show could tell a story with real consequences and real emotional weight. And then the show immediately proved that it had no interest in continuing to do so. This is the final contradiction. The Simpsons is capable of greatness. It has proven this dozens of times across 37 seasons. Frank Grimes' death, the HOMR letter, Lisa discovering the truth about Jebediah Springfield, bleeding gums, Murphy playing saxophone on a bridge, Ned holding Maud's empty chair at the dinner table, Homer looking at his baby Maggie's photos at work taped over his plaque so they spell out, "Do it for her." These moments are not flukes. They are evidence that the show, when it wants to, can deliver emotional storytelling that stands with the best in the medium, but the show does not want to. Or more accurately, the show cannot afford to, because growth requires change, and change requires an ending, and The Simpsons has been renewed through season 40. There is no ending coming. There is only more. More episodes, more seasons, more resets, more contradictions, more jokes built on the backs of characters who will never be allowed to evolve. The show is a machine, and machines don't grow. They run until they break. 790 plus episodes, 37 seasons, 36 Treehouse of Horror specials containing over 100 horror segments, dozens of character deaths, some canonical and some not, one permanently banned episode, a handful of accidental prophecies, a mountain of plot holes, a man with a crayon in his brain, a town built on a pirate's lie, a family that will never age, never change, and never leave. Consider what it takes to produce a show for this long. Thousands of writers have passed through its doors. Voice actors have aged from young performers into industry legends. Some have died, others have retired. The show has weathered cultural revolutions, network ownership changes, the rise and fall of entire entertainment formats. It premiered on a network that was barely a decade old and now airs on a platform owned by the largest media conglomerate in human history. It started in a world without the internet and now exists in a world where clips of its episodes go viral on platforms that didn't exist when its characters were created. And through all of that, Homer's still 38. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Maggie still hasn't spoken her first word. The nuclear plant is still running. Moe's Tavern is still serving the same 4 guys. The couch gag still plays before every episode. And the opening credits still end with the family rushing to sit together in front of a television, which is exactly what they've been doing since 1989, and exactly what millions of viewers have been doing right alongside them. The Simpsons didn't just predict the future, it became the future. An entertainment product so durable, so deeply embedded in the cultural landscape, that it has outlasted the world that created it. The America that watched the first episode in 1989 is gone. The television industry that produced it has been completely rebuilt twice. The children who watched Bart say, "Eat my shorts," are now older than Homer. And still, the show continues. Still, the family sits on that couch. Still, the camera pulls back and the theme song plays and the episode begins, and nothing, absolutely nothing, has changed. The Simpsons started as a cartoon about a dysfunctional American family. It became the longest-running sitcom in American television history. It became a cultural institution so massive and so deeply embedded in the global consciousness that it survived the death of actors, the cancellation of its own beloved characters, the purchase of its network by the Walt Disney Company, and the complete and total transformation of the entertainment industry from broadcast television to on-demand streaming. It has been parodied, analyzed, quoted, referenced, studied, and debated more than any animated show ever made. And at the center of all of it, unchanged from the very first episode, is a man named Homer Simpson sitting on his couch, watching TV, drinking a beer, ignoring the cracks in the walls, while his daughter plays saxophone alone in her room, and his wife stands in the kitchen wondering if this is all there is. That's not comedy, that's a loop. And the most disturbing thing about it is that we've been watching it spin for 37 years. And most of us never noticed it was moving in a circle. If you made it to the end of this, you already know that The Simpsons is more than a cartoon. It's a 37-year experiment in what happens when you freeze a family in time and let the world age around them. The comedy is real. The darkness is real. And the lore runs deeper than most people will ever bother to dig. So if you want more deep dives like this, if you're the kind of person who watches a family sitcom and wonders what's really going on underneath the yellow paint, hit subscribe. Because The Simpsons has 790 episodes and we have barely scratched the surface. The show is renewed through season 40. There's more lore coming, more contradictions, more deaths, more predictions that may or may not come true. And somewhere in Springfield, right now, in whatever dimension that fictional town occupies in the collective imagination of the world, Homer is still asleep at his desk. The nuclear plant is still one bad day away from meltdown. The crayon is still in his brain. Burns is still counting his money. Moe is still alone behind the bar. Barney is still slumped in his stool. Ned is still mourning a wife the show killed for a pay dispute. Frank Grimes is still buried in a cemetery where Ralph Wiggum plays on his tombstone. And Lisa is still playing her saxophone on the roof, alone at night, hoping that someone, somewhere is listening. She's been playing that song for 37 years, and the show has never let anyone hear it. That's the most disturbing lore in The Simpsons. Not a single episode, not a single death, not a single prediction. It's the silence between the notes, the things the show shows you without ever saying out loud, the family that loves each other and can never truly connect, the town that survives everything and learns nothing, the show that could end at any time but never will because the machine needs to keep running and the couch gag needs to keep playing and Homer needs to keep sleeping through his shift at the plant that should have killed him 316 times ago. You've been watching a tragedy for 37 years. You just didn't notice because the animation was colorful and the jokes were good. See you